I would say a second thing I think we got right is that we always from the beginning saw our seeming competitors as potential collaborators. And whenever we did learning events for our practitioners, we opened the doors to all of the other boutique leadership firms that were operating in our ecosphere and built very deep collaborative, generative relationships and partnerships with other firms. So operating cross-boundary gives you more ability to pull the best of the best for a particular client opportunity. You can really make bespoke solutions. It also means you're not holding the overhead of your full capacity, so it puts less strain on the direct expenses of your own company. And maybe most importantly, it just creates beautiful professional friendships that you can count on when the times get tough.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Business of Learning podcast. My guest here today is Amy Elizabeth Fox, who is the CEO of Mobius Executive Leadership. Amy, I'm so happy to have you here today.
Delighted to be with you.
Well, Amy, tell everyone a little bit more about Mobius, who you guys are, what you're all about, any context that you want to share about the business.
So Mobius is a leadership development firm that was founded in 2005 by my sister, Erica Ariel Fox, and I. Erica is a longtime lecturer at Harvard Law School, and so the core of our leadership curriculum grows out of the canon of thought leadership that's emerged from Harvard University over the last 20 years. I sometimes describe our offerings as at the nexus of best practice and next practice. What I mean by that is, on the best practice side, we're drawing on bodies of work that point towards how you help an organization become deliberately developmental, how you help teams build psychological safety needed for innovation, how you help executives to mature along the continuum of adult development, what neuroscience is telling us about neuroplasticity and how to unlock new and emerging transformational capabilities, and what we know now is required to help people expand their adaptive capacity in a time of great volatility and complexity. So on the one hand, we're drawing on really solid academic research and practices for helping leaders mature their transformational capabilities. And on the other hand, the avant-garde part of it is that we're using pedagogy in the leadership programs themselves. That's really drawing on the expressive arts, the therapeutic arts, perennial wisdom, sort of avant-garde experiential learning methodology that gives people a much deeper experience of personal change and is more likely to lead to, I think, profound shifts in how they lead others.
Very, very cool. So it sounds like there's a morph in between both of those to really excel in the experience, but also the immersion that they go through to achieve the results. Is that right?
Yeah, that's exactly right.
Awesome. Very, very cool. And is there a specific type of company that you guys usually work with? Is it all over the map? Talk to me a little bit more about that as well.
Yeah, we've really, since we started, we've had the great privilege of working with Fortune 500 companies at the senior level of the organization. So we typically work with the board and the top team, and then the top 100 or 200 inside a company. On occasion, we'll have the privilege of working with hand-selected high potentials who are designated for the succession plan of a C-suite a few years later. And we've also had the joy of giving away pro bono services to various NGOs and nonprofits and public sector efforts that we care about a lot. Just to mention one at the moment, we have about 4,000 coaches globally volunteering to work with federally furloughed workers from USAID who've lost their job in the last short period. So we're constantly looking for where we can repurpose what we have in terms of executive coaching and leadership programs and offer them free of charge to organizations we believe in.
Awesome. That's very, very cool.
Yeah.
And I wanted to highlight something as well that we briefly spoke about before we started the recording, which is you mentioned this is your 20th year, which one, congrats again. But two, talk to me a little bit more about the growth of the company. I'm sure that as you guys started things, it wasn't always just rainbows and sunshines as it isn't for most entrepreneurs as they're starting their journey. So talk to me a little bit more about that process. What were some of the biggest challenges and lessons that you faced in the first 3-5 years of building Mobius to what it is today?
Well, if there is a rainbow and sunshine phase, we haven't hit it yet in year 20. I would say, as everyone listening knows, it's very hard to run a company The particular scale of Mobius, which is, somewhere between 20 and 40 million of revenue annually, is what my friend at Harvard Business School, Ashish Nanda, calls the Bermuda Triangle of professional services firms, which is to say, it's much easier to be profitable as a little company or as a big company than it is as a mid-sized company. So we've had many chapters of stress and strain. What were the lessons learned? Well, I can say a couple of things I think we got right. One is that from the beginning, we were committed to the depth of the interventions we were offering, and we were operating in a kind of consciously counter trend mode, meaning at the time that Eric and I started the company, there was a lot of pressure to make programs shorter and more practical. 2 days is lovely, but what can you do in a day? And 1 day is great, but what can you do in a brown bag lunch? And we had, I think both of us, a very strong conviction that we didn't believe you could do much learning or shifting in a 1-hour session, and that we wanted to identify clients that would commit to doing something longer and more profound. And we didn't really know if there would be a market, but we really felt that that was what we wanted to offer.
Yeah.
And maybe that's a lesson, I would say, that creating a company out of your own instinct for what you would find joy to do gives you a lot more resilience to deal with the hardship and the heartache than doing something that is about spotting a market niche out there and turning yourself into a pretzel to meet it. So following your passion maybe is one piece of advice. I would say a second thing I think we got right is that we always from the beginning saw our seeming competitors as potential collaborators. And whenever we did learning events for our practitioners, we opened the doors to all of the other boutique leadership firms that were operating in our ecosphere, and built very deep collaborative, generative relationships and partnerships with other firms. So operating cross-boundary gives you more ability to pull the best of the best for a particular client opportunity. You can really make bespoke solutions. It also means you're not holding the overhead of your full capacity, so it puts less strain on the direct expenses of your own company. And maybe most importantly, it just creates beautiful professional friendships that you can count on when the times get tough.
Yeah, and that's so awesome. I really like how you brought that up. And it's so often that I've heard that so many companies are like, hey, how can we one, differentiate ourselves from our competitors, but two, not associate with them at all? Like, how can we just stay into the two different sides of the court, so that we can show people that we are different and whatever else? But it sounds like you did the complete opposite. It's like, hey, how can we all just uplift together? Because yes, we're in a way competing, but if we're all looking at the same things and chasing the same direction, we might as well support each other along the way.
And I also, some element of that was that we were, and as several of our partners were, bringing in very novel solutions for leadership development. We're sort of upending the world of how executive development got done. And I felt that if a group of us, of a consortium of organizations, created a new gold standard, it was going to create a new pool of possibility versus competing for scarce resources in an industry that was unlikely to embrace what we were doing. So from the beginning, I thought of it as much as about a movement as about self-interest in the business. And that's served us really well. If I made mistakes, I think one big mistake was not understanding how much my personality would have strengths and shadows for the organization, and not getting enough coaching early on. So I think over the 20 years, people benefited from the gifts I have as a leader and struggled with some of the less evolved parts of my personality and what happens to my emotions when I get under stress. And I feel like in the last 10 years, I've gotten much more sophisticated coaching and practices for managing that stress. And I'm a gentler and kinder guide for the company. But I wish I would have done that sooner. I wish I would have asked.
Awesome. Thank you for sharing that. And I wanted to highlight something you mentioned in there, which is you, from the beginning, went with your gut of, hey, I think this is what we want, or one, this is what we want to do. But even if it's not the right niche or what's going on or the trend, let's jump head first, and obviously paid off now. But how do you feel that applies to nowadays, where everything is so fast paced and they want shorter learning and they want to maybe get away from that immersion so that people can have quick bits and pieces? again, which can be beneficial in a lot of times, but the immersion, I think, is something that cannot be understated into how people learn and how much they will gain from being so immersed and intentional when they're learning new things and going through coaching or whatever it might be. So do you think that now it's a challenge to maintain that immersion and that full time commitment that it takes to go through a process like that when everybody is looking towards the fast-paced learning?
It's a wonderful question, and it's a very cutting edge question in my own thinking. If you ask me what keeps me up at night, it's that question. I would say from when we started in 2005 until really immediately now in 2025, there's been a increasing understanding from learning and development directors, from chief people officers, from people trying to do large scale culture change, that you need to pull people out of the business and give them a quiet, concentrated time to focus on cultivating their self awareness and increasing their inner resources for leading in a time of such, as you said, fast-paced information saturation, change, demand, etc. At the moment, it's the most compressed in terms of people feeling pressurized in their time, feeling like it's hard to take that retreat time. And so, on the one hand, I do feel the pressure point of clients saying, "What can you do in a shorter time?"
Yeah.
And I think that's going to force those of us that do this kind of work to differentiate what can be learned in knowledge nuggets and what can only be matured in immersive contexts. And at least for the time being, we're going to try to keep a stake in the ground that our unique contribution to the field really is helping people to take um, best use of that retreat time to make catalytic changes, changes that can't be made in simple, it would be better if you replaced behavior A with behavior B, or here's 5 good questions you could ask to get AI to give you the most generative information. We're not trying to do skills training or technical training. We're trying to do human evolution, and that actually just can't be rushed.
Very, very awesome. Thank you for sharing that. I like that perspective a lot. And you mentioned that a lot of, or pretty much all of the growth that you guys have achieved has been through word of mouth, through referrals, which is a pattern that I've often seen for many, many companies that I've spoken with who are a similar size to you guys as well. And talk to me a little bit more about that process, because oftentimes, looking as an outsider, I obviously don't know the intricacies of what goes on and how your customers talk to each other and all those things. But looking from an outside view, I think the referrals and word of mouth is something that every single business should always use as much as possible. How can you scale that side of acquisition as much as you can? How can you make people love you more so that they talk to you about you more, right? How can we bring that up? But there's also the risk factor that is like, okay, if we're only looking at this type of acquisition, how risky is that for the business? So how do you perceive that and I know it's been 20 years now, so you probably got used to it. But how do you perceive that balancing those things of, hey, here's how we acquire business, and there really hasn't been much of a quote unquote strategy to do much else, but this has actually been supplementing us really, really well, and it's still allowed the business to grow because we do a good job, you do a good job, people tell more people. But yeah, I would love to hear your thoughts on the entire not reasoning behind it, but just your thought process on using that type of acquisition for the business to where it is now today.
Yeah, I think we've really had, exactly as you said, Joe, 2 sort of tributaries to building our business. The first is our thought leadership and the generosity with which we've shared our thinking and our ways of working. My sister Erica serves as our chief thought leader, and she's published a wonderful New York Times bestselling book called Winning from Within.
Awesome.
Is the sort of source material for a lot of our leadership development programs. And Erica publishes a lot, blogs a lot. She's a contributor on Forbes. And so Erica's ideation and Erica sharing very openly her latest thinking and her latest insights from her work with CEOs, I think has been one way that we've contributed to the discourse on leadership development and also helped clients to find us and pay attention to what we're doing. But the other much more important one, or, much more sort of commercially meaningful one, I should say, not more important, but more driving of the business, has been over delivering for clients, building very deep, long-standing relationships with our core clients such that they feel a really strong sense of connection to Mobius. They feel part of what we're doing. And therefore, exactly as you said, they're likely to bring us up in conversation or to refer people to us. And we have spent a huge amount of time thinking of the community of practice of Mobius wider than just our practitioners, but really including leaders who've come to our programs as part of the family of Mobius. So we invite them to our annual gathering. We stay in very regular touch with them. We're often in coaching relationships with them after a program. So I think when you don't think of those relationships in transactional terms, but you think of them in terms of love, in terms of co-commitment, in terms of mutual generosity, you get that back tenfold in terms of business growth, or at least that's been my experience. And I think that doesn't really work as a tactic. That's either it's either in your heart to care like that or it isn't. But once it is, when it is, it's very generative and it's very beautiful. I mean,
it's awesome. It reminds me of I'm sure you're familiar with Adam Grant's the book Give and Take. Everything that you just said just reminds me of that book. So that's really, really awesome as well. And I have two final questions here for you, Amy. One is a question that has become, I guess, a frame of the podcast. I've been asking it to everybody, so it'll be no different to you. So we'll start with that one. Let's say you had a magic wand and you could use this phenomenal, amazing magic wand to solve just one thing in the business, a challenge, an obstacle, whatever that might be. And by solving this one thing, you'll be able to achieve all your growth goals just like that. What's the one thing that you like to solve in a business?
A business like ours really is very responsive and vulnerable to the economic health of the climate. So the client demand goes up and down in huge waves, which makes it very hard to right size the company, makes it very hard to make appropriate investments in research and development. It makes it very hard to set appropriate expectations for an outsourced network of practitioners. So if I had a magic wand, I would just make steady the revenue demand so that we could have an infrastructure that's right-sized and make promises to people we can fulfill on reliably and not have such the interstices of up and down revenue demands. Yeah.
Awesome. Very, very cool. Thank you for sharing that. And the final question that I have for you, Amy, it's actually not a question from me. It's a question from my last guest to you, and they had no idea who you were. So are you ready for the question?
How delicious. Sure.
Here it is. What is the most non-work skill or hobby that has surprisingly helped you in the business?
Cooking.
How so?
It's a great question. Well, for one, you learn how to put together seemingly disparate ingredients and make something delicious on the backside of that. So I think I've learned how to architect a variety of interdisciplinary experts working together on a team to make a beautiful offering. And secondly, more personally, it's just very meditative and it's a source of renewal and artistry and self-expression and earthiness that I need for my lifestyle where I'm on the road a lot and traveling a lot. And I love to cook a meal for my friends.
That's awesome. I actually really love cooking as well. And I find it so interesting that you mentioned the ingredients because I think one great concept of cooking that applies to business as well is also just sequencing, because oftentimes people in business are doing the right things. They're just doing it in the wrong order. Just like
or the wrong pace. You throw it in a little too early.
Yeah, exactly. Like if I'm baking a cake and I put the eggs last, like the cake is not going to be a cake. So it's all part of the process. But yeah, Amy, thank you so much for your time. This has been such a great conversation. Where should people go if they want to learn a little bit more about you, about Mobius, or maybe the book that you mentioned from your sister?
Yes. Well, so Erica herself has a website, www.ericaarielfox.com, that has a lot about winning from within and her work in general. And of course, you can go to the Mobius website, www.mobiusleadership.com, to learn about our client programs, our coaching, our executive retreats, and we'd be delighted to talk to anyone.
Amazing. Amy, thank you so much for your time. I really appreciate you.
It's a pleasure.